Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is the show where I review all the comics I've read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between. And before I get started, we do talk about the viewer's pick of the week at the end of the video, so in the comments below, let me know your pick of the week for a chance to be featured on the episode. This week I had a pretty heavy haul, and there's a mix of issue 1, so we're going to be talking about that and which issue 1s are actually worth picking up. But let's start with number 14, which is actually in issue 2, and that is Avengers Inc. issue 2. I thought issue 1 was fun enough. Always want to love Janet. I'm not a huge fan of Wasp. Like, there wasn't a book where I'm like, this is where Janet shines, but I always found her to be a very interesting character, and I just don't know if there's been the right story for her from what I've read. And I wanted to pick this up and enjoy this book, because I want to see a series that leads with her. But this issue, I really felt like dipped a bit, where it focused more on Vision, and this book does feel more one and done. The last issue focused on a different story compared to this. Honestly, the cliffhanger with Hank was a big deal, and there's maybe some mentions of it in this issue, but it's not really a big part of the issue. It's mostly about like this ghost of the Avengers mansion. And then next issue looks like it's gonna be dealing with Jane Foster, which I'm excited for because I like Jane, and I'm gonna give this book one more issue to see where it goes, because if Jane doesn't convince me, I don't know what else will. And I think the artwork is a little sketchy for this one as well. I just don't feel like it completely works for this book. So giving that 2 stars, and then it's number 14. Moving on to number 13, which is Catwoman issue 58. This is I want to say, one of the last parts of the Gotham War, and I have to say I also don't think this story has progressed at all. There's not much that is happening. And in every issue, there's some potential that I enjoy, like Batman and Catwoman, and their interaction in general. Their idea that they love each other, but they're on different sides of the law, and a very different angle of their different side of the law problem that they've had for decades, and I like that, and I think the artwork is really good for this one, but there just doesn't feel to be a direction for this book. So overall, giving it 2.5 stars. I definitely wanted to like this arc more than I did, but I just feel like it overall fell flat. Moving on to number 12. This is one of the issue 1s we'll be talking about, and that is the Sensational She-Hulk issue 1. I love Rainbow's writing. I enjoy her writing tremendously in Runaways. I feel like it honestly was just as good as Brian K. Vaughan's run. This book has been interesting because I think it's in Rainbow's wheelhouse. We get to see the romance, but it's also a very slow burn. The reason why this is so low is because as an issue 1, I don't think it completely works. It really feels like a continuation of that previous series, but then all at the same time they're trying to explain everything that happened in the previous series, but not in a new reader friendly way. It just feels like a stall until the end of the issue where we get to see Bruce show up, and you're like, okay, cool, Hulk is here, that'll be a fun interaction. So overall, I just don't know if this issue did much. It didn't really progress the story much. It really just highlighted what's already been going on, but also I don't think it made it in an exciting way where new readers are like, wow, I really want to jump into this. So overall, giving it 2.5 stars. I do like the artwork for this series. I will continue to read it, but I feel like it's mostly the same of what we previously been getting. All right, moving on to that other issue 1, which is Hack and Slash Back to School issue 1. I was really looking forward to this. I like Hack Slash. I always call it Hack and Slash, but it's just Hack Slash. I've always enjoyed this book. I'm a big slasher fan, and I like how it turns slashers on its head. If you don't know, her mom was a slasher. She killed her mom, and now she hunts slashers. That's the premise of Hack Slash. And this book goes back to the early days of the character, which is interesting, kind of gives this Lost episode vibe. It is also a whole nother creative team. I love the art for this. So the artist and the writer are the same person, Zoe, and the art is just tremendous. It's kinetic, and it just works. Story-wise, where I felt like this faltered a little bit. It was hard to get into as someone who's read a lot of Hack Slash. Sure, it was new reader friendly, and in that regard, I think it worked out. But as someone who's just read the series a lot, it doesn't feel like it was reinventing anything until the end once you get to the Academy. But there wasn't a lot of room to flesh out the Academy. I wanted to know more about the characters, but I just didn't feel fully invested in the story. I just feel like the pacing could have been better overall. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 11, I believe. Moving on to number 10, a book I'm so torn on, and that is World's Finest issue 20, a book I loved but steadily have been losing interest in. This continues actually the first arc of World's Finest, and if you're a fan, I say if you're a super fan of Mark Waid, continue to read this book, see where it goes, because it's connecting to his Kingdom Come storylines, which I have read a few of, but I don't really remember much of it. If I did read it, it was a long time ago. So I'm not fully invested in that. Obviously, I'm invested in the character they introduced from the beginning of the series. That's cool. That's interesting. And that's the thing that I enjoyed about this issue. And obviously, the artwork, I think, is good as well. I think it's Dan Mora, yeah. Which I've been enjoying that creative team. But the multiverse stuff, we see a lot of it. It didn't really do much for me here. Felt like it was pretty scattered until the end of the issue. I want to continue to give this series a try and see where it goes, but I do think it's getting to a point where another issue or two, if it doesn't improve on my list, I might be dropping this book. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 10. Moving on to number 9, which is Rogue Sun, issue 16 we're up to? Issue 16. This is definitely more of a mythology-driven issue, but it also does have some heart, which is why this is a bit higher than some of the other books on the list, because we do get to see our main Rogue Sons and what their relationships are as a family, and then what I liked is when we kind of get back to reality and see, okay, what's happening with his extended family, what's happening with his friends, and we get some good checkups here. There's a good emotional moment between our main character and his grandfather. There's a cliffhanger with the grandfather that makes sense with the emotional moment. And overall, this isn't my favorite arc of the series. I really do like it when it's kind of balancing more of the high school life with the mystical life. But I think if you enjoy this side of Rogue Sun, you'll be enjoying this arc. So overall, giving that 3 stars, and that is number 9. Moving on to number 8, which is Nightwing, issue 107. This is an interesting arc, because I really enjoyed last issue. So I'm like, oh, finally, we're doing something different. We're kind of progressing the story. And then this issue completely stalls. It's mostly a flashback issue of okay, this is who Rick was, if you don't know who he is, and this is who the girlfriend is, and this is kind of what they're going to be dealing with on a pirate ship. I like the end where he disconnects with Oracle and he's kind of on his own. I found that interesting. I still find it interesting that they're tackling an infamous story like Rick Grayson, and I think the only thing I really liked about Rick Grayson was honestly the girlfriend. So I was like, oh, it's cool that she's returning and she has her own story, and the setting is really interesting, pirate ships, and visually it's cool, but not a lot happens in this issue, and that tends to be the fact for this series in general. And they continue to talk about very similar things that they talked about in like issue 75, like the Tony Zuko stuff, and I do want some more movement with this book. And if there's not movement, I want real gutsy character moments, and I'm not getting those as either. So overall, giving that 3 stars, and that is number 8, I believe. All right, moving on to number 7, which is Titans, issue 4. This is another weird book, also written by Tom Taylor, because I love the art. I want to love this book. I want to love the Teen Titans, and I don't know if there's been many current opportunities to do it with this team. Like, I grew up with Cassie and Connor, and I love those books, but the original Teen Titans I like, but I don't love, and I've never found a series where I'm like, wow, this is why everyone loves the original Teen Titans. And besides, obviously, the Perez and Wolfman run, like, obviously. But yeah, this issue, in this series in general, it's very one-shotty. There's definitely different things they focus on in every issue, but the string is that Garth is being possessed and Flash might die. And I like the progression of that, but it's very minute in this issue. It takes a while to kind of get to that point, but I like that. And, I'm curious to see how long I'm going to sit with this book, because, again, if you compare the Nightwing type of storytelling with this, is it going to be the same thing? What's the plot going to be overall for this book? But I'm sticking around for a couple more issues to see what it's about, but it's not completely blowing my mind, besides the art. I do love Nicola Scott's art, and I think it fits the vibe of this book well. So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 7. Moving on to number 6, I was surprised to see this a bit lower, and that is Superman issue 7. This is the legacy anniversary issue, because there's an anniversary issue of every series and a legacy issue of every series. It's a bigger book. Let me see how much it's $6, so it's priced about $1 or $2 above. I don't actually think a lot happens in this issue. I don't think it needed to be an anniversary issue. It doesn't really feel like it. I really wish it was just a normal sized issue, because there is a lot of points that slog with this one where we get to see, the Superman family fighting the villain and Lois going against Lex. But it's not really until the end of the issue where we get to see Lex's family come back and Brainiac get involved by the end, where you're like, oh, this is where it's going, and cool, I'm excited for that chapter. But I don't know if we necessarily needed this long of a chapter to get there. Artwork is great. I really like almost this 90s vibe to it. And I love this book. I just think this one was a little bit more point A to point B. So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 6. Moving on to number 5. And that is Local Man issue 6. This is a book that I feel like more people should be talking about. And if you like 90s image or 90s superhero books, read this. It's about this guy who is a bad superhero. No one likes him, and we continue to see that here, but he's also not maybe the best person, and that's really what happens in this issue, where he's cheating on or I guess he is the cheater. This woman that he used to date, she is married to another man who he is the superhero is working with. They're cheating with each other. So it's like, oh man, like he's not the best guy, and this is not the first time he's done it. And you're like, oh, you feel bad for the husband who he's becoming friends with, and it makes this really interesting, morally gray storyline that's going on. And then we also get to see a little bit more development with the girl that he's with, where you're like, oh, she kind of has a checkered past as well. Is she connected to the superhero stuff more than we thought she was? Because there is some connections there. So I like this issue. I thought it was a pretty good progression to the book and some interesting insight on the interpersonal relationships. So giving that 3.5 stars. So that is number 5. Moving on to number 4, which is The Incredible Hulk, issue 5. This issue, I think it takes a little while to get there, but once it gets there, it's great. The issue is kind of more looking into, honestly, it felt a lot like DC's Green, like the green of Swamp Thing. It had that vibe, or the red of Animal Man. They're in this kind of Elseworld place, and they're digging deeper into who Hulk is and, his connections to himself. And we also have the supporting character, the little girl, not little, but teenage girl, also along for the ride, who has her own trauma. And then in the end, we get to see Betty show up, and I love Betty, so it's always awesome to see her. And she brings up a point of like, hey, this is where the story's going. There's this person who can separate Hulk and Bruce. You should do it. I'm going to. And you're like, okay, there's going to be a lot of story there that should be interesting. So I like this point A to point B issue. I think it's bringing us into an interesting area. It definitely felt very horrific, which I enjoy as well. I like the tone. I think this art style worked well, even though I think it's a guest artist for this one. It worked well for this issue, and I'm loving Hulk, so go check that one out. 3.5 stars for me on that. Moving on to number 3, which is Klick, Klick, Boom, issue 5. This is the last issue of the series, and man, this was just such a good book. I love how different it was. It's about this girl who doesn't talk. She just talks through pictures, and she becomes friends with this journalist who won't shut up, and they become a found family. They go up against the bad guy. This is the kind of final boss battle. There's some wonderful action here, especially with the Polaroid camera. And by the end, they live happily ever after, and they become a family. And it's a cute ending. There's no real explosiveness in this issue, but it's a really solid wrap-up and a really solid book overall, with just some amazing art and some really great character work. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is number 3. Moving on to number 2, again, the topic of the video, which was the best number 1 of the week. And for me, it was J. Garrick, The Flash, issue 1. I want to say I was pleasantly surprised, but I really shouldn't be, because Jeremy Adams, literally everything he touches is just pure gold. This book is no exception, where we get to see Jay reconnect with his daughter, and how his wife, him, and the daughter just blend as a family now that 40 years has passed. And what does that look like for the Flash family? What does that look like for their kind of immediate family? There's some good action in this one if you're looking for more Speed Force Flashness of it all. But if you liked Jeremy Adams' run on the Flash, I feel like it's a very familiar feel. It's characters coming first, but there's an overall arc where you're like, okay, where's this going? And I think a good example of that is that we dig a little deeper into the past of how did Jenny disappear? And we get that answer. Honestly, a really solid issue 1 for characters that I know, but I'm not like super fans of. Jenny I've read in the Stargirl stuff, but Jay, he's a cool character. He's a cool guy, but he's never been my Flash. So it's cool to kind of get into a different side of the Flash. And I definitely think you guys should check it out. Artwork is a lot of fun for it too. I think it works really well. It's bright. The Speed Force stuff is great. So giving that 4 stars. That's number 2. Moving on to number 1. I think you guys should know this already, but it's Kill Your Darlings issue 2. This book, the issue 1, I said it was perfect. And I think this is a great way to do an issue 2. So in this one, we get to see a time jump, which I'm not completely surprised by because they've been really dating where things have been taking place. I think it was like 1998 or something in the last issue, and now we're in 2003. So they're teenagers now, and our main character is in not so much a mental hospital, but she's definitely not in a great place. She's like in I guess you would say it's a mental hospital, but people are allowed to come in, and we get to see her kind of dealing with that, and she feels guilty that her mom died, and she's kind of listening to the people around her saying, you killed your mom, and she's like, maybe I did. And what I really love is that the boy from the first issue, her friend, has stuck around the whole entire time. It's kind of her anchor throughout this series. It's the person that she actually holds on to, and he doesn't believe everything that's been going on and trusts her as a person. And she wants to escape. Obviously, she doesn't want to be here anymore, and her friend helps her out. But also, the elephant, imaginary friend character shows up and also helps her escape, and you're like, oh no, she's imagining this, what's going on, is she going crazy? But the friend sees it as well, and we really start the new path of where the series is going, of hey, she created all these worlds for them, let's go into that fantasy world with the help of her real friend. And I thought this issue was a really interesting look of how to do an issue 2, because issue 2s are so hard. You have your premise of it in issue 1, you set up, okay, this is where the characters are going, this is what our story's about, but then issue 2 tends to be a very point A to point B, and this book does a really wonderful job at making it more than that, actually setting up the story even further, progressing the story even further, where you're like, oh, I'm even more excited to see where these characters go, and not exactly spelling out what this series is about, which I'm also really enjoying about this book, where you're like, I don't know what the fantasy world is. I don't know where the next issue is going to take us. Are we going to be in the real world? What's happening? What's happening to the mom? Is she actually dead? There's a lot of questions, but not too many questions where you're like, I'm confused. I think it's just the perfect balance of good mystery, good character work, great art. It's just I keep saying it, but if you like comics and you want to write comics or you want to create comics, this has been so far a really great map of how to write a comic, how to write an indie comic, and I've been really enjoying it. So I give that 4 stars. That is my pick of the week. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite comics were, and last week's book was Batman. I believe it's called City of Monsters, issue 1, and here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno, and hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.